Hello, and welcome to Broadcast Advocate, a podcast produced for you by NASBA, the National Alliance of State Broadcasters Associations. This is a podcast where we get to talk about all the really wonderful things happening in radio and TV, the issues, the challenges, the growth, the relevance. It's all right here. So thank you for joining us today. Broadcast Advocate is brought to you by Local Broadcast Sales, providing on-demand sales training and revenue development services that work nationwide. You can visit localbroadcastersales.com. My name is Monica Armenta, and I'll be your host for this edition of Broadcast Advocate. I am the CEO and president of New Mexico Broadcasters Association. And today we're talking about a wonderful topic that really doesn't get too much attention, or as much as I think it should. We're talking about the state of Spanish radio in America, its growth, its challenges, and why it really remains one of the most vibrant and resilient sectors of broadcasting, even in 2026. Allow me to introduce our guests. First, I would like to introduce Deborah Parenti. Deborah is the president and publisher of Streamline Publishing's media division. That includes Radio Inc., that we're all familiar with, and RBR plus TVBR. Deborah has decades of leadership in broadcasting and also years of success. And she brings with her a perspective that really you only get after years of experience and that kind of success. So Deborah, thank you for joining us today. It's a pleasure to see you.
Thank you for having me. It's great
Also
being
with
here.
us, nice to have you. Also with us is Matt Martinez. Matt is a local broadcaster here in New Mexico who has decades of service also. He's one of the longest serving members of the New Mexico Broadcasters Association, and he knows a lot about what it means to operate and own these stations. Matt has had a wonderful success throughout the years, but really came into his own and I think attracted a whole new set of followers and respect after the 2022 peak fires that we had here, the Half Canyon fire. I'm getting this all wrong. I am so sorry. We had fires in 2022 that changed the whole fabric of New Mexico, the Canyon Peak fire and the Calf Canyon fire. So Matt, thank you for joining us. It's a pleasure to see you both. Let's start this podcast by talking a little bit about what it means to be in Spanish language TV today. Deborah, for years, it seems that people were talking about Spanish TV being dead, and yet we see growth, it seems. What do you think is the biggest misconception about Spanish language TV today?
Well, I believe probably the biggest misconception is that you can reach this massive audience by not using Spanish language TV. That in today's more diluted world, and Matt, feel free to chime in on this because you know probably this part better than I do. But in today's world where there's so much bilingualism, so much culture that has um, meshed together and everything, that you can reach people outside of what is really very organic and very dear to them, and that is Spanish language programming, Spanish language television. I think one thing that's brought a lot of this to the forefront has been the World Cup. Where we have seen such huge audiences, both, yes, on general market stations, English language stations, but certainly who is brought to the forefront by some of the Spanish language commentators who have been so popular over the years. So there's been, I think, a renewed interest and actually maybe not even renewed to some people, but like an awakening that, oh, it's here. So,
Matt, would you agree? Have you seen growth? I know that what Deborah just said is very true, that you can't really reach the whole audience without also trying to communicate with the Spanish language speakers as well. Is that what you see in your daily operations?
Yes, and I can also add to that by saying, we know that the population is already there. And just to give a little background, my first language was English. I learned Spanish, and the first radio station I had was Spanish, but I've added 4 more, and all of the rest are English radio stations. But nonetheless, as I see what's going on the television side of the equation, I could tell you that you could almost feel it and sense it that a lot of what's going on in television is trying to really bring all of the Spanish speaking folks up to date. So, at one point you could see the bigger ones, Univision and Telemundo, they only make minimal changes every so many years. Not anymore. They're keeping up to date, sort of like the way network television does, and they sort of keep up with a lot of the trends. And I don't know how many Spanish language televisions there are across the country, but it probably has to be the second only to English, I would imagine.
Right.
I
would
find
agree.
it, yeah, I find it fascinating that, we have 68 million Hispanics in America right now. It's one of the only groups that's still showing an increase in the birth rate. So not only are the numbers continuing to grow, but when you talk about young listeners or young viewers, the average age in this country, I think for the younger set is 31 with Hispanics, but 39 outside that group. So there is the potential for growth there. In fact, in 2034, it'll be the first year in this country that we have more people aged 65 and older than we do children. But yet you don't see that represented necessarily in advertisement sales. So I think, is the challenge really the audience, or is it convincing advertisers that the audience exists? I'm curious to know what you think.
What I believe what you say is absolutely true. Um, there seems to be a disconnect at the agency level and at the client level that insofar as who's buying and more importantly, who's influencing a lot of those buys. Um, Culture is a huge influence. Whatever your culture, it's a huge influence. 20% of the population and growing in this country is Hispanic. That's 1 out of every 5. And then take everything else, and it's a mishmash of other nationalities and everything. And I'm not trying to compartmentalize everything, but I think you have to look at it logically, and that is there's a 20% huge influence factor there, influencing not only within the Hispanic culture, within the Hispanic community, but outside of that. You look around and you see so much influence. I'm not just talking about tacos either. There's a huge interest in the culture, in the food, in the music on radio in particular, in the music, in fashion, everything. And again, going back to the World Cup, I think that has helped accentuate and also introduce to a lot of people who, first of all, didn't necessarily know much about soccer, but didn't know much about some of the huge cultural influences behind that. So going back to your question though, I believe we tell this we say this all the time. We need to tell our story. And at the Hispanic Radio Conference this past year, Albert Rodriguez on the executive panel made a very telling remark, I thought. We talk about telling the story. We talk about the fact that we're not getting that story, but we have to take responsibility because we're the storytellers. So we need to be we need to take a look at in the mirror, what are we telling and how well are we telling that story and who are we telling it to?
It's a great point. Matt, what do you see as an operator every day with both Spanish and English? Do you see more representation now in Spanish advertising? Is there growth there?
There is and continues to be. I've been fortunate enough to work with agencies that represent some of the fast food clients in my area of the state. But I have an observation that I think probably needs to be said. And, some people might say, well, I don't know if that's the right approach. But, and Deborah's right in regards to we've got to tell our own story. One of the things that I'm, noticing now is the folks that work at agencies. I know they're getting younger, especially as we get older. They're in their 20s. Some of these people are making decisions for huge corporations. Some of them may be in their 30s, but nonetheless, if they're not listening to Spanish radio or they're not watching Spanish television, they don't recognize the fact that there's a whole demographic that they're pretty much putting aside. And really, What does it take? I don't know. It takes educating the agencies, especially the buyers for some of these larger companies and entities, to recognize that they might need to bring in some Spanish-speaking buyers as well to start making a difference. I've also, highlighted issues relative to campaigns. New Mexico is going through their process now of getting ready for the general election. And I've asked a couple of the campaigns, especially the campaigns running for governor, and I'm asking them point blank, because in some cases they're ignoring radio and they think social media is the only way to get that word across. Well, that's okay if everybody that's voting is between 18 and 30, okay? But the most loyal voters, and I know I've been involved in politics pretty much all my life, are your older demographic of folks, and they're not going to be on social media. Some of them don't even want that part of the phone to be activated. So we really need to do an awareness campaign, both with agencies and with some of the clients. The bigger companies in the country need to realize, if we're the Spanish population is the demographic that's growing, 1 out of 5, what do you call it, children that are being born in the U.S. right now are Hispanic, and maybe in some cases more. New Mexico is a minority majority state. So we have more Hispanics in New Mexico than any other demographic. So what it boils down to is we need to do some education, I believe.
And to Deborah's point, to reach everyone is just such a Herculean task, right? And the whole media market is so fragmented right now. We hear a lot now about streaming, podcasts, and digital platforms becoming bigger areas for us to compete in. And I don't know if you happened to listen to the last installment of Broadcast Advocate, but it was during that podcast with the Jacobs Group that Casey Jones in Michigan, heard one of the Jacobs brothers say that he was actually in a taxi in Thailand where they now have video. So that competition just continues to grow. But I wonder, is it really competition now, or is it just a necessary way to continue to exist as far as expanding the branding?
Well, absolutely. I mean, we have digital competitors who are wholly digital. I like to call them the unlicensed and unregulated amongst us, because they're the wild. They have no boundaries. They have no rules. They have no regulation. Nobody regulates. There's not that piece of paper called the FCC license holding them back from anything, impacting revenue as well as impacting content. That said, this is also an opportunity for radio and television to expand their offerings. It's not just an opportunity. We have to. You have to be in digital. You need to have streaming on. You can no longer. Years ago there were a few operators, big operators, who I'm not going there. I'm not going to pay the extra licensing fees. Yada yada. I'm not going to do it. Well, you can't do that anymore. If you do not have some digital products, if you haven't expanded your platform, you're putting yourself further behind the 8 ball, because you need your reps to be able to go in and compete against that unlicensed competitor who's cleaning your clock sometimes in that arena. Facts are facts. We can't change that. So I think that it's extremely important that radio and television broadcasters beef up their game and look, sound, and be as good as those competitors in that arena, because that is also where a lot of these young buyers are looking. That said, I want to make one comment regarding the demographics. And Matt, you brought this up, and it's so true. There is that older demographic there that isn't into social media. And I think a lot of times we neglect, including those of us who are in that older demo, we neglect the importance of that particular demographic. Those people have a lot of disposable income. They're no longer raising kids. They're no longer, they're buying presents for the grandchildren maybe, or the great-grandchildren, or whatever. But they have a lot of income. They have a lot of influence as well still, because young people do look up to their elders. What do you do? What do you buy? So,
Yeah, thank you for making that point, Deborah. It's puzzling to me why that doesn't get more attention. I mean, I have an 83-year-old father who will not attempt streaming. I joke about him having his DeWalt radio outside on his favorite AM and for the whole neighborhood to hear. But he's got more cash than, his younger grandkids and the rest. And I don't think that we always pay attention to that. So I appreciate you making that point. Matt, can you tell us, have your stations really embraced digital, and are you able to do that and still keep radio front and center?
I mentioned it earlier. I'm still in the transition of trying to get equipment replaced. The Hermit's Peak Canyon fire devastated 341,000 acres in 2022. And we're in line with a whole host of other folks trying to get equipment replaced. All my transmitters suffered smoke and ash damage. So we're still waiting for our claim to go through the process. Once that's accomplished, and maybe even not even that long, in fact, I actually have a quote right here in front of me for equipment from Broadcast General Store for streaming systems, so that all 4 stations here will be able to be streamed. But it's one of those things I don't think I can wait much longer. I really think that the only way that I'm going to be able to keep up is get that information out there. And then it also gives me the flexibility to do RDS, which means on the new digital platforms inside the vehicle, the actual screen, you'll be able to see the name of the artist that's playing, maybe the name of the album, what year the album was produced. That's the kind of stuff people want to know about, I mean? And it's weird, back when I grew up, you get a cassette tape with a band that had 12 great songs or 10 great songs. Now it's one song at a time. I don't think these new artists could make 12 in a row. And if they did, there's only going to be 1 or 2 good ones. The rest of them, why did you do that? But
I
in the
think
old
they
days,
just,
you could
yeah,
get 12 of them.
I think they just know how to make more money out of it. But
Well, they do.
You have brought up another really perplexing question, and that is for rural America and for your smaller stations. All of these new competitors have created a new economic strain for them. Stations like yours, the cost of having to upgrade and the rest. Do either of you have anything you'd like to say about what you've seen in terms of smaller radio stations, your mom and pops and the rest, keeping up, and how they are maybe looking at more innovative ways of doing that, or what's been successful?
I mean, it all boils down to the ability, and as Matt mentioned, having the equipment to do that. And it is obviously more difficult and sometimes not as cost effective initially for a smaller broadcaster. I mean, let's face it, the budgets are smaller, and that means the CapEx budgets are smaller as well. One thing I do want to mention, though, about streaming, and we forget about this a lot, and I had this argument just the other day with someone. Well, we can stream. We don't need AM in the cars or FM. We don't need the yes, you do. Because streaming is dependent on towers, cell towers. Tell me what the cell service was like during those fires a few years ago. If you don't have that, streaming is non-existent. The only way to get the information is through broadcast. And of course, we all know AM is king of the hill in that area, which is why it's so important to cars and to farmers and to safety organizations and things like that. So, I mean, do we need to stream? Do we need to do podcasting? Absolutely. Do we need to be on social media? I'm talking about, stations now. Absolutely. Absolutely, because you do have to compete with that. But never forget, and we should never forget to remind other people that just because you have this in your hand, you do not have everything. That tower goes down and they go down. You have nothing then. Better have a crank radio. Better have a crank radio.
You give us a perfect segue to take a break right now, because Matt has a whole lot of experience in that area. We'll take a break, and when we come back, we can talk about what would happen to these communities, communities like Matt's, if in fact AM radio wasn't still there, AM and FM. We'll take a break and we'll be right back.
Local broadcast sales loves broadcasters, and broadcasters love localbroadcastsales.com. The web-based LBS New Seller Program is transforming first-year sellers into confident, connected, and clear communicators. It's powerful onboarding, built for real-world selling, and free thanks to your forward-thinking State Broadcasters Association. If you're ready to build your new seller's confidence, clarity, and connection, let's grow together. The LBS New Seller Program is building the next generation of broadcast sellers.
Welcome back to Broadcast Advocate. I'm Monica Armenta, this host for this edition of Broadcast Advocate, and I'm joined by two wonderfully talented and knowledgeable people about Spanish radio in its totality, actually. Please help me welcome back Deborah Parenti. Thank you, Deborah, for being with us. Deborah is the president of Radio Inc. and RBR and TVBR, and Matt Martinez, a local broadcaster, operator, and owner of many years. And when we last spoke, before we went to the break, we were talking about what happens in emergencies where people suddenly don't have access to their cell phones or some of the other ways of communicating that they have become accustomed to. And we certainly saw that here in New Mexico in 2022. As we've mentioned, the Herman Peak and the Calf Canyon fire here destroyed over 341 acres and really changed the script for this state. It was devastating. It wasn't just about the fires, it was about people's ranches, their homes, their businesses, and their generational legacies. Matt knows a lot about that. Matt, you were on the air for 24 hours, day after day. You received a lot of accolades and a lot of praise for that because you made a huge difference. What would have happened to that northern piece of the state had your stations not been up and running and providing those services?
You've heard these stories across the country where a hurricane, a tornado touched down and did, devastation to communities and in some cases livelihoods for people that pretty much impacted their lives forever. I never realized that, one little spark that was actually done as a controlled burn by the Forest Service could have made so much, wreaked so much havoc in this whole area. 341,000 acres is larger, I think, than the state of Rhode Island. And what it boiled down to is the fire lasted from April almost all the way to July. And then the subsequent flooding was also really difficult to deal with. But what actually happened, two counties lost communication completely to the outside world. That was cell towers, both the television and any other repeater that would have been up there for even communication for law enforcement. All of those facilities burned. They burned down to the ground. They had nothing actually left. So people that did not leave the burned area, in some cases trying to make sure that they could salvage their homes, their farms or whatever, their animals, whatever, they turned to radio. And they knew that no matter what time of the day they joined the radio, and in some cases they were going to their cars because they didn't have electricity as well. So they knew that there was going to be reports from the Forest Service. They knew there was going to be reports from governmental entities that would come into the station. We almost had 400 interviews in 5.5 months. And that's everybody from the governor's office, state senate, state representatives, all the way to state and local representatives and local law enforcement. We had local governments like the city, the county, and a whole host of people that were coming in here on a regular basis. And we were able to direct folks to make sure that they could get food, they could get water. They were able to transport their animals in some cases through the radio. Could you imagine we were trying to coordinate all that? We were also helping people with prescriptions. And in the cases of people that needed oxygen machines, be able to get them out of the burn area and get them a hotel or get them to the sites that the county had set up and the city had set up throughout the area. It was really eye-opening, and I didn't realize until maybe the first week that we needed to continue to do this. So I jumped in to start helping my two DJs. I have Dwight Torres and Angie Lister, who literally were doing this almost on an all-day basis at the beginning, and it turned into be a job. And I took over some of the weekends, giving them some relief. But all of my staff participated in updating the community. And I'll tell you, two of our stations are regional. So they cover a fourth of New Mexico's size population. And then we also go into southern Colorado and a little bit into West Texas. And all those areas were being impacted by smoke. So we were able to get a lot of that information out. But I'll tell you what, if you look at other disasters that have happened in this country and possibly even others, when all of the cell towers and everything like that goes down, who do people turn to? And in most cases, there's also repeaters, there's television stations that are not on the air because, especially if it's a forest fire, that these sites are sometimes on top of the highest points in their communities. They turn to radio, and I know we saved lives, we saved animals, livestock, and I know we made an impact. And it almost seemed that from that point forward, Monica, you're not going to believe this, our business actually grew because I think people realized, I guess radio still makes an impact and it hasn't stopped ever since. So I'm grateful for that piece, but I hope we never have to face this again.
I hope not too. And it's a perfect place to mention here that NASBA, NAB, all of our stations, our broadcast associations across the country are still fighting very hard for passage of the AM for every vehicle. We do not want to be in a spot ever in this country where people have no choice but to pay a streaming service for news and information, especially, but emergencies. There is no replacement. We are free. We're local. We're accessible to everyone. We're trusted. There is just no other answer in my mind. I think as we sort of wrap this up, I'd like to ask you both a question and give you just a second to think about it. But if you can imagine that it's 5 years from now and we're still on the topic that we've had some time to spend on today, what would you hope people would say about Spanish language TV? Deborah?
Well, Spanish language TV, and may I throw in radio as well?
Yes, radio, of course, both.
But
TV, excuse me. Yeah.
You came from TV, I came from radio. So
Okay.
so between the two of us, we get them all covered. But I would like to think that number one, by that time the act has been passed. Dear Lord, please let's get that act passed. Because you're right, and Matt right there on the ground floor knows that we certainly save lives, we save communities, and animals and everything else. But I would like to think that there would be by that time a greater awareness and appreciation for the Spanish language radio and television brethren amongst us, the broadcasters, who give so much to this country. Every year I walk in, I'm going to plug for a moment the Hispanic Radio Conference, which will again next year be the first part of June, but in Tucson, in Phoenix again next year. But I need to do that because it brings up my point. Every year I walk in there, and I'm at the age where, quite frankly, I could sit back and say, I'm done. I'm going to go, walk into the sunset and go shopping and traveling and everything like that. But every year I go to that conference and I see the dedication of this Hispanic radio broadcasters. And by the way, we have some television people that pop in from time to time as well. There is an unmatched passion among that group of people who, not just for their medium, but for their listeners, their viewers, whoever, and their vendors. It's a real community. Matt, you've been there before, I believe, and there's a sense of community there. We tabled it for 3 years when the economy tanked the first time around back in 2009. And we didn't do it 2009, 10, or 11. Came back in 2012. There are very few things, and I've been in this business for over 50 years. There are very few things that ever come back, whether it's a television show, a reboot, or or something like a conference. This thing came back with a roar, and it has continued ever since 2012. 2027, that'll be another 13 years on top of the first two. So but the reason that we've been able to bring it back and make it stronger every year is because the broadcasters are so dedicated to what they're doing. So I guess what I see usually 120 people there, something like that. Okay, the other two things is that I'm still doing it by that time in 5 years. Trust me, they'll be propping me up. But secondly, that we have twice as many people there, because twice as many people will mean that we are serving people bigger and better. There are more Hispanic radio stations and there's more Hispanic advertising. Right now we get what about, Matt, correct me if I'm wrong, but like 5 or 6% of the advertising, the percentages vary. We're 20% of the population, but 5 or 6% of the overall ad budgets. I'd like to see that in double digits in 5 years. And sorry for taking so long, but that's my
cheers
wrap
to
up.
that. Cheers to that. Matt, what do you hope?
I'll also put in a plug for the Spanish broadcasters in your conference, Deborah. I've been to a couple already and can't wait for the next one. I really enjoyed all of the information that we gather and the awareness that's brought up during the conference. But more importantly is the networking. You know, I've met some incredible people through the years, both at the NAB and also through NASBA as well, helping with the association. There's just a very passionate group of people that you'll never find anywhere else other than this broadcast industry. These people are very committed and they're really tied in. So I'll tell you, I'm hoping that what happens, just like you, Deborah, is that the agencies start to transition and see what kind of an impact they're actually missing by not allowing us to get into the double digits of the dollars that are being spent. So I'm hoping too that they transition and start to pick up, Spanish TV and radio and go further. You know, I had an opportunity of judging the Colorado Spanish Broadcasters awardees. I was surprised, and this is just a note outside of everything else, but I didn't want to forget this. I was surprised that I didn't know that there could be a Spanish newscast on a radio station that could last an hour. And I'm saying, boy, they're doing something to keep people interested that long. Well, they are. You know how they do it? They're not only talking the news, they're also giving the history of how we got to where we did. And I thought that was intriguing. I never knew that existed anymore. I don't know if anybody could have my attention for an hour anymore, barely television shows that I like. But at the end of the day, they do have some special secret ingredients that I don't think a lot of people are picking up on. So I think those are the things that I think we have sort of promising in front of us that I know someday. I just hope that they're able to catch that fire and be able to retain it and represent themselves properly to the demographic that's actually growing and caring about this industry.
Absolutely.
If I could just tag
said.
on one last thing just for a
Sure.
moment here, because it has to do with Monica and her cohorts across the country. What the state associations, how supportive and what they do. And I don't think you get probably near the credit that you deserve, but thank you for serving so many so well.
Thank you, Deborah. We appreciate that. It's a wonderful job. And again, to remind people that we are free, we are local, we are trusted. We can't afford to lose that in this country. So I so appreciate your time, both of you, Deborah and Matt. We didn't even get to talk about what Spanish language radio means to communities, and that's everything. So maybe there'll be another segment later, but for now, that's it for this edition of Broadcast Advocate. We thank you for joining us, and we invite you to tune in again in a few weeks when there'll be another edition. And in the meantime, you can always go to NASBAonline.net for the latest news on everything having to do with radio and TV broadcasting in this country. Thank you so much for joining us. We hope you have a terrific rest of your day.